so far? Someone already did it. Sorry, see. Video's coming. There's another gentleman there too. I'm just familiar with him. I'm not sure what.
Anyone else coming? All right. How many books do we need? 3 at least. Everyone else got one? Okay. And syllabi. Okay. We're set. I hope that everyone that's remote is able to get access to the book. Not sure how it works, but we're going to meet in the back thing for the beginning of the church tour. But just a few words of introduction. I know many of you have been to church. I think you've been like years ago, right? So you said you're just returning. So this is the first of about 6 classes. We'll see how it goes. If we have anything that's like if one of the classes goes a little longer and we can't make up for it, we might have to go to a 7th if that's okay with y'all. Okay. And I don't know, I didn't put the dates down on the syllabi, because I wasn't sure if any of those weeks might be interrupted by something, or if a great number of you were unable to attend or watch on live stream, then we'll probably postpone something like that. So just a heads up for that. My name is Father Irenaeus. I've met most of you, but if you guys who are here can give me a list of your names, and I think we're all on the Catechism contact, so that's a good thing. And I'd like to have with your list of names, you can submit it to the Catechism Class thing. I'd like to have like your interest. I don't know how to do. What do you? there is names you can submit it to the Catechism Class that I'd like to have. Okay, leave.
Thank you.
To leave the meeting?
To leave the
No,
meeting?
no, no. You're good.
Huh? Cancel. All right. So if we'd like to begin in the back, we can do so.
And again, for those of you
And
who are
again, for those of you remote, we
taking
will
your
be taking your questions on the Catechism chat, and someone will read those to me as they come in, God willing, and I can answer them. Now,
Can you change them to us?
can you
Sam?
No.
us, Sam?
You can join again, Father, but I think you are turning in the video. Join and turn on the video, please. Yeah. Can you turn? Yeah, I can come.
All right.
Yeah.
That's all right. Okay, now I'll just relax.
All right.
These front there's the
All
doors of the
right.
church. And I'm just speaking to everyone about when we first come into the church, our general tradition
These are the front. There's our general
and when we do that,
tradition
we take our
is
hand
to
and
make
we take these three fingers together, the thumb, the middle finger, and the index finger. Okay? We put them together. The other two fingers are down, like you see.
this two down. When we make the sign of the cross going from our foreheads to our chest, or a little bit over our chest, stomach, between the stomach and chest. And then we go to our right side, because we're right. I'm just joking. And then we go to the left. And these points represent in Holy Scripture that you will worship the Lord your God with all your mind, and all your heart, and all your soul, and all your strength. Okay? The right hand is usually like mind and heart, pretty self-explanatory. But why would you go to the right hand first? The right is usually the soul. Okay? And the last on those lists of how you love God and your neighbor are with all your might. Okay? So this is the soul, the right hand side. You greet people, you say, come here, stay away. Usually, most people are right-handed, so the right hand is an extension of the soul. If you communicate, mostly it's done with the right hand. Okay? So it's an extension. So the mind, heart, soul, and strength. Why is the left hand strength? Okay, I can understand that because I'm left-handed. But most people are not. So why is the left hand the side of strength? Because when a warrior went into battle, he would wear his sword on his left side. He would draw it with your right hand. Okay? And you'd also have the shield on your left hand. Okay? Your sword hand is, you're swinging the sword like this, but you're guarding yourself with your left arm. So it's the side of might. That's how it becomes. So love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, soul, and strength or might. And then sometimes we go back to the heart again and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? And sometimes we abbreviate that. In Orthodox lands, we put our hand on our heart. The Rastafarians do that. We kind of got it from Orthodox culture. Okay? So you see someone, instead of saying my dear, okay, like in the Old English, they would say my dear. In Arabic, it's habibi. I think there's some other languages that say that, but without words, we would put our hand on our heart like that to say, you're dear to me. Okay? So you see someone to acknowledge their humanity and to extend to them the love of Christ, we put our hands in our heart. So that's what all those symbols stand for. Some will say Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The Father is eternally in the heavens. The Son came down to earth. And the Holy Spirit gathers all of humanity from left to right, from east to west. Sorry.
Yeah, this is awesome. Seriously, okay?
That was my wife. And that brings up another point. Priests in the Orthodox Church cannot get married, but married men can become priests. You have to be married first, okay? And that was due to the fact that, let's say you have a church filled with Hatfields and McCoys. You know the Hatfields and McCoy? Okay, in old America, Hatfields, and there's a saying, fight like Hatfields McCoys. They had an age-old argument. They hated each other. They were always rivals. They were always challenging, always jealous, and sometimes killing each other, and in vengeance killings, okay? So they're called the Hatfields and McCoys. It's two families. So you have these two, let's say you have two or many families in the church that want to have a foot in heaven. So this family has a pretty daughter, this family has a pretty daughter, and this family has a pretty daughter, and you get a young priest coming in that potentially could get married, you're going to be dividing the community. You know what I'm saying? So it's practically speaking, pragmatically speaking, it's good to know man is married and he has a good grasp and is able to support his family, then such a person would also be able to become a minister in the church. But if you're single, okay, there are single priests, but they have to be celibate. Okay, so there's no playing games like that. There's no divide that would divide the community. We don't come to divide the community. We come to bring them together for unity and oneness. So in the narthex, you'll notice a number of things. Behind me here, for example, we have the candlestick. And this area, before you get to the pews, before the area of the pews right here, for example, I can't see if you can see them, is called the narthex, generally, in most churches, and the Orthodox Church as well. And sometimes it's a separate part of the building. Sometimes there's a wall here, and it will separate this area from what's called the nave, okay? Nave comes from a ship term, navi, okay, like navy. Okay, the navi, the nave of the church is where the faithful generally congregate to pray. And then way up in front, you see that the step, okay, it's called the vima. Some places have a step out where the pews end, there's a step up, okay? And that's called the solea, okay, that first part. And then you have the steps that go up into the altar, and then behind the altar, that's called the iero. That part of the building, that room in there is called iero, from the word hierarchos, meaning like hierarch. Okay, so where the hierarchs go. This is all designed after the Jewish temple. Okay, so the Jewish temple had, in the narthex, it was like the court of the Gentiles, where non-Jews could come, but they couldn't go any further. Okay, and then with the nave, where the faithful can come in, then men and women could come in. Jewish faithful men and women could come in if they were clean. Okay, but there was a limit for that, and that would be like the court of the women, let's say. And then there was the court of the men. There's another division where the men could go in, and then if you weren't a Levite, there was a limit to that, and then beyond that were the Levites. Okay, and then you had what we have in the altar, which is the iero. That's like the holy of holies. And only the priests in Judaism, only the high priest would go in there once a year to cense and clean up and make sure everything was in order. Okay, but that's where the hierarchs, the priests, the deacons, the bishops, and so on will conduct much of the service when they're serving. Okay, and usually no one goes in there unless they have a function. Okay, there is kind of a common belief, kind of on the folk level, that women are not allowed in the altar. Well, yes and no. There are reasons for that. One of the reasons is we're very, very protective of that room as not having blood. Okay, so if I had a cut and it wasn't congealing and I couldn't like stop the bleeding, I would not go in there. Or if I was cut suddenly during the service, I would have to bolt out. And if it didn't stop, that would be, I couldn't finish the service. Okay, because of bleeding, because blood is not allowed in there. So since women have the period of blood, okay, that's kind of the reason why. And sometimes it's irregular, and sometimes we don't know how young. Some girls are very young, some go later. So it's questionable. And some after, they think after menopause, then all of a sudden it starts up a little bit again sometimes. So there's like uncertainty there. So that's why women were not allowed in the altar, because of the blood thing. But many of the older women, if you go to Jerusalem, you'll find some of the older women that are the nuns that are way past menopause. They can be actually inside the altar, guarding the doors, so that tourists like us don't want to like pop our head in and go and like walk around and in the altar, and we're not supposed to be in there anyway, right? So there would be women guarding the doors from the inside. Okay, so that does happen. And I've also heard, although it's not very well supported, is that there are some churches that will use little girls as acolytes because they're not to that point yet, the blood and that kind of thing. So they're allowed to, but that's kind of scary because you never know when it's going to happen. You know, how at what age. So that's generally the rule behind that. It doesn't mean, from our perspective, that when women have blood, the flow, that they're unclean. Okay, in the Old Testament sense. So we don't have that same understanding as in Judaism. Once you're baptized, you're made new. Okay, so even women, they're made new, something different. So we don't really see the necessity, other than the physical necessity, obviously, to clean. But we don't see a ritual necessity to clean, except for women to clean themselves after that kind of thing. All right. So what we see generally when we enter into an Orthodox church in the narthex is an icon stand like this one. This is called the proskinitarion. And on it, if you guys want to come around here on this side, and on it you will see an icon of the namesake of the church. If, for example, this were St. Barbara's, there an icon of St. Barbara would be here. If it were the church of, let's say, Pentecost, named after Pentecost, the Pentecost icon would be here. Here we have a depiction of the Annunciation, because that's the namesake of the church. And that's the event in the Gospel of Luke, I believe, where the Archangel Gabriel, here depicted, comes to visit the Virgin Mary and announces to her the good news of Christ's incarnation in her. And actually, the fathers say she could have said no. Okay, but rather she said, not my will, but the Lord's be done. Lord's will be done. Okay, so she is really, for us, the archetype of Christian martyrdom and Christian servitude, like surrendering all of ourselves to God and to His service. And this icon depicts that. Her head is bowed in humility. She might be asking, well, how is it possible that the Virgin conceives without? And she's maybe thinking that, well, if people see her pregnant, they might say bad things about her or spit on her. But you know what? She concludes that doesn't matter. What God wills matters. So to heck with the rest of the world, I will do what God wills, what He wishes. So that profound moment in history, of course, makes her really a participant in our salvation. Okay, because she could have said no, but she didn't. So she became a participant in the incarnation of Christ. She became God's mother, so to speak. And again, in the Old Testament, we see a lot of the intercessions of mothers to their sons, like especially in the king's mother, being able to ask things that others could not, being able to ask for mercy for people whom the king condemned to death or had incarcerated. The mother could actually say, you know, show mercy. And he'd say, okay, Mom, I'll do it. So that's kind of what happened in the wedding at Cana in Galilee when he turned water into wine, right? She says to him, they're out of wine. In other words, I know you can do something, so what are you going to do? And he said, it's not my time. But he also said, who are you to me? Or who am I to you? Okay, that kind of question. What's the answer? What's the answer to that question? Yeah. Okay, he is her son. And good Jewish boys do what their mamas tell them. So she didn't need to ask anymore if he was going to or not. She turned to the servants and she said, do what he tells you, because she knew what was coming. Okay, so because she had that kind of guts to actually intercede and do that, knowing that he's God, but at the same time knowing that he's also her son, we also call upon her for things that that maybe we know we don't deserve, or that we know we're scared about, and we know that we deserve punishment or something like that. And so we ask her, you know, please plead with your son, who is our God, to be merciful. Okay, so that's kind of a background of our relationship with the Virgin Mary. And it's also with the saints, okay? Because a person who lives their life and people who know that they're a healer and they go to them, they're going to ask them for things, okay? And even after death, many of the saints have proven to be effective intercessors for those who call upon them to cure them. And it's not the saint and it's not the Virgin Mary that's doing the miracle or the curing. It's their prayers that are calling Christ to do the action. It's the power of God that's doing it, okay? So if you turn to this side of the church, then you will see what we call the Pangari. This is where we have the candles for sale. We just recently converted over to beeswax candles. Beeswax candles are interesting because they have the smell of the natural wax. And there's a tribe in Africa called the Kalamajo. And if you have like livestock, they think it belongs to them. Okay, even if it's your livestock, they'll come and they'll steal your livestock. They'll take it from you. Okay, so the bees are like the Kalamajo. They smell your beeswax and they come for it, right? They come to take it. So it's an interesting thing that we have the tradition of the candles and the incense, because the smell of incense actually drives them away. Okay, they're attracted by the beeswax, but the incense drives them away. Okay, and also because in those days people didn't have the ability to take a shower every morning before they come to church. Okay, you kind of sometimes once a week, if that, or less. You're going to come to church. How can't you? You know, you're going to worship, and everyone else is reeking to high heaven too because of body odor. And so the incense is actually there to cover that. Okay, and the sweet smells of the church actually have that kind of pragmatic thing to cover that so you're not distracted when you pray. But at the same time, it represents our prayers rising as a sweet fragrance to God. And the whole thing about the incense is also interesting, is that like Christ sacrificed his whole self, his entire body on the cross, so too the little piece of incense sacrifices its whole self. It's completely consumed into ash and it becomes smoke, but at the same time, the entire church. Why we do it, and a symbolic reason. Okay, it's not just one or the other. All right. When you look back at the church here, these icons that we see environment. So you see hell, sometimes hell depicted, and souls of the damned and all this kind of stuff going on. And you are going to be a participant to prevent that from happening to other souls, okay, and to yourself. Okay, so it's in a sense, it kind of is a reminder of being, you're a Christian, you're expected to be a Christian now that you're going out into the world, but don't just save yourself, save others, okay? And I think St. Seraphim of Sarov said, if you save yourself, thousands of people will be saved around you, okay? So we often have that kind of thing, the icons and the position to remind us of those things. Now, traditionally in the church also, this narthex area might have depictions more of Old Testament saints. And some churches in Greece have even had like philosophers, because there was kind of an idea that God was trying to teach the ancient people through their own twisted religion, philosophically, to move away from that and to move toward monotheism, worshiping one God. All right. And we do see evidence of that in some of the philosophers. And many of the students of the philosophers actually went on to develop their own form of monotheism in Asia Minor, what's now Turkey, independent of Judaism or any other religion. They just followed the line of thought in the Greek philosophers, and they ended up monotheists before Christianity was introduced to them. So in a sense, many of the early fathers say that this was a way by which God was planting the seeds of the word or the seeds of the Holy Spirit that were to grow. And then when people were introduced to Christianity, they would say, oh, yeah, we understand that. We have that symbol ourselves. And that's what it means. And it was easier for them to become Christian. Okay? So we don't really take pagan feasts or pagan symbols and Christianize them like Western churches have. There are strict canons against that. But there are things that have been common to all religions. For example, the Easter egg. Okay? The Easter egg is related to Passover. Okay? Our Easter is related to Passover. Our feast of Easter, what we call it Pascha, it's related to Pascha because Christ was crucified and rose from the dead within the context of Jewish Passover. Okay? And you go to a Seder meal, it's a Passover meal. Okay? They have the bitter herbs, they have the lamb, and then they have a little stand, and on top of the stand is an egg. Okay? An egg. So it isn't a purely pagan symbol. And many of those things that come from Judaism were also shared already in pagan, I guess, philosophies and religions. But there was a commonality already. Okay, a commonality. It wasn't that Christianity was taking from or borrowing from these non-Jewish roots. All right. One of the interesting things about Zoroastrian, I don't know if you're aware of Zoroastrianism, the religion of Zoroastrianism, Mazdaism. It was a very ancient religion of Persia. It predates Christianity. The prophet that founded that religion was believed by the Jews to have copied Moses. Okay, but for all intents and purposes, we don't have any evidence of that. He was actually in Kyrgyzstan, north of Iran, and that's where he was allegedly born. Some people say he was born elsewhere, but many of the places around kind of denote that he came from there. And he gave several prophecies. One was that a prophet would come after him who would be born of a virgin. Sound familiar? Okay, and that this prophet, the Saroshant, would be called the King of Kings. Sound familiar? King of Kings. And that he would be intimately associated with the general day of resurrection and judgment. Sound familiar? Huh? Sounds like Jesus, right? Okay, and when Jesus was born, okay, and I think it's in Matthew's gospel, what happens after he's born? Yeah, and the word magi, which is the Greek word magi, okay, the word magi is actually the Greek word for Zoroastrian priests. So we got connection, okay? So it's interesting. And he also said that this person, Saroshant, would be descended from him, okay? Now, the royal family of Persia, like Cyrus the Great, that helped the Jews rebuild Jerusalem, all that kind of stuff, or at least return them from exile. He was descended from Zarathustra, the prophet. An ancestor of Christ named Zorobabel had two wives. One was Jewish and one was Persian princess. Okay? And the Virgin Mary seems to have been descended from that Persian princess, which then makes Jesus a descendant of Zarathustra and fulfills the prophecy again. So it's really interesting that these things happen. It's not explicitly said in the gospel, but he said it and the gospel says it, and the two seem to match very nicely. Okay. Buddha also said there's someone after me who will be born enlightened, because Buddha went through a struggle to get there. He said, this man will be born enlightened, and from infancy he will reveal things to you that I've never dreamt of. Okay? And many people think, well, that's Jesus. Okay? Interesting. Interesting. So, and many Buddhists actually, after looking at Christianity, considered Christianity a branch of Buddhism. So I don't know. It's a strange thing that these things do exist, but we are aware of them, and it does come up sometimes in the iconography and sometimes in our traditions and in the lives of the saints. Okay, so as we move in, and when we make the sign of the cross, often sometimes it's when we pass by an Orthodox church. So if we're driving out here on the street and we happen to pass by the church, we'll make the sign of the cross. Okay, when we eat, when we pray for ourselves, and when we eat, we make the sign of the cross. Sometimes we make the sign of the cross over our food, okay? And if you're the man of the house and you have children, okay, the man of the house will often bless his wife and bless his children like this. So he's like, just like you cross yourself, you hold your hand and you will make the sign of the cross over your children or your wife, that, okay? The opposite way, okay? You go to your left, which is their right, okay? And you can bless your food and you bless your family as well, like that. All right, so that's also a tradition that we have. St. John, the evangelist, was said to have made the sign of the cross 3 times. So when you see, sometimes you see people making the sign of the cross once, sometimes you see people insisting, I have to make the sign of the cross 3 times. The making the sign of the cross 3 times actually goes back to the apostle St. John, beloved disciple. Okay, so yeah, any question? Yes, when they get their candles. Sorry, I should show from here. Yeah, when they get their candles here, yeah, you can make a donation. There's like this slot here. Then you go over to the candle stand over here and you light your candles. Okay, and that's simply, you would light your candle from another one. Sometimes these are lit over here on this in the corner in the oil. Those are, I usually try to light those first and put one mill. But you can light your candle on any candle, any fire that's burning. You light it, you put it in the sand, okay? And then you stand back, you kind of, what we like to call isikia, okay? You're still and you're quiet, just like the man that was at Jesus's feet in the gospel reading today, okay? He was crazy, he was demonically possessed, he was going everywhere, dancing and yelling at people and violent. But the presence of Christ gives us what we call in Greek isikia, which is both stillness and quiet. And it's also used kind of in modern Greek, like if a child is like bebopping around and not paying attention and like, kind of being hyper. Sometimes the parents will say, isikia, and the child immediately quiets down and doesn't move, okay? Because it means be still and be quiet at the same time, okay? So we try to have isikia. Once we light the candle, we'll back up, we bow our heads. Sometimes we don't pray immediately, but we just pause a moment to quiet ourselves down. And then we say the prayer for whomever we're praying. Sometimes it's the sick. Sometimes we pray for the souls of the dead, not because we're going to change the condition of their souls, but because we love them. Okay, like you would write a letter and send it in the mail. Okay, by the same token, we light a candle for those who have reposed, and we believe that they see the light and they know they can feel our love. We're expressing this love to them, just as we still think that we can feel their love, even though they're physically not present with us anymore. We still have that connection of love with them, okay, for all our lives. So that's why we also pray for the dead. We pray for the sick, of course, for their health, so that they can become well, or that injury can be healed. And whatever need we might have, or needs of others, we also pray by lighting candles and stilling ourselves down and then saying the prayer. And it's interesting, I don't know if you've ever been to campfires, but like when you're around a campfire, you're more contemplative. You kind of relax and you watch the flames and you think, like your mind kind of relaxes. And that's also, we know that that's the effect of fire, of watching fire. So we have all these candles and we're praying, and that's the effect. You see, that's the same kind of like the pragmatic side to lighting a little fire when we pray. All right? Okay. Yes.
So is this something that's done when you have like sort of a request, or is this something done every time that you went to the church?
It could be both. You just, when we come into the church, sometimes we light a candle every time for someone who's passed away, for someone recently, or someone long time ago, like a grandparent, a great grandparent, someone that we knew a long time ago, a friend that may have passed away. We light a candle to remember them and kind of to express to them, in a sense, in a spiritual way, that we still love them, we still think about them. Okay. Or we might have personal things that come up. Okay. Or sometimes people will call me and say, hey, Father, can you open the church and we'll light a candle? Because there's some special prayer that they want to say or some sort of request. And usually then they'll come in, they'll light a candle, and then they'll go and they'll sit down and they'll pray quietly as well. Okay. I don't know if that answers your questions, but we kind of do both. So, okay. So let's enter into the church then. In the old days, by the way, in the old days in the early church, when we really didn't know who our friends and enemies were, sometimes those who were not yet Christians, okay, were not yet baptized or not yet members of the church, and sometimes even visitors we didn't even know, we wouldn't let them be on the narthex, okay, especially in apostolic times, because, you know, a lot of the Romans, a lot of the authorities, even the Jewish authorities, they wanted to waste Paul. They wanted to waste Peter. They wanted to waste Andrew. They wanted to waste the apostles, right? So if one of the apostles was preaching and you got one of these visitors up there with a hidden knife, he could spring and like stab one of the apostles or one of the early saints of the church. So the church kind of had that protection. They had people guarding, like special people that had a position to guard the doors and to make sure everything was in order, okay, kind of like security. And they would make sure that no one that was unknown, that was suspicious, would get close enough to the priest, the bishop, or a Christian dignitary that might be there on special that is wanted or that someone wants to kill. You know what I'm saying? So we had that kind of thing. And monasteries still follow it, not that there's a practical reason to, but they still follow it. And we can understand if you don't know what you're doing, okay, and that you would not go beyond this point, because you go in here and people could be praying and you say, hey, you know, can I borrow $5 for the bus? You don't do that, you know. And if people don't know the difference, you know, it's disruptive. And even going in and having people that are strange going in and going like this and looking at these icons and saying, what's this? And I'm trying to give a sermon, okay? That's disruptive. You don't want that kind of thing happening. So sometimes people just don't have the right decorum, so they don't know church etiquette yet. And so that's kind of a practical reason why the monasteries don't do that. But we don't do that. We don't do that because we want to be welcoming in the city churches. You know what I mean? There's also the custom in some of the monasteries for the women to cover their hair. Okay, if you notice, most of the icons of the women, at least the saintly women, have their heads covered. Okay, you will see in some Roman Catholic paintings of the Virgin Mary, sometimes you'll see her hair coming down, like on the side. Okay, you'll never see that in an Orthodox side. Okay, you never see that. Okay, because that would be immodest. Okay, the women cover their hair out of modesty. And even St. Paul, I believe in one of the letters to the Corinthians, he was writing like women should have their heads covered. Okay, like they should. So, I mean, Muslims actually got it from us. And then we think, oh, we don't want to look like a Muslim, so we don't do it. But, you know, they got it from us. You know, that was the early Christian tradition for women to cover their hair. So I don't encourage it, but I don't discourage it. Okay. But if someone asks me, what should I do? Well, Calliope was a little girl in that one. So little girls, sometimes their hair is showing. But like adult women, like Irene, you're not going to see her hair. That thing in the back is actually there's like a baggy kind of thing that goes over the hair, like first, like the Rastas wear, you know, like the women would have that. And then they would put a veil over on top of that. to be extra hidden, to be extra, because that was seen as modesty for women. Okay. So I think that's it for the narthex. Sam, can I shut this off then and we can take over there? Okay, thank you. Let me, how do I do that? Sorry. Yeah, shut it off. Actually, I can leave.
All right, so we'll take over from upstairs. If you guys want to come forward then, you can see we have these icons again inside the church. As I said, the narthex usually had the Old Testament, even some places like the philosophers without halos. But you have that, but once you got into the church, you'd start seeing more contemporary saints as you move forward. Because the structure of the church and the iconography of the church are moving you toward a certain thing. Okay? They're moving us forward in time. So often the ideal, we rarely actually see the ideal, but often the ideal is we have older saints in the back, and as you come forward, newer and newer and newer saints, okay? But what you see here are icons of events in Christ's life. Obviously, those would be further back. And then you have the martyrs like Barbara, who's like third century, St. Catherine, second century saint, an early martyrs of the church, would be further up. And then the saint in the back, by the way, wearing the black hat, that's just his torso, not the guy in the throne, yellow in the torso. That's Saint Sabas of Kalinos. A lot of people here are from the island of Kalinos. And yes, and one of the big saints there, I believe he passed away in the 1940s, was Saint Sabas of Kalinos. There's still people alive today that remember him, remember meeting him as little children, and maybe even who were baptized by him from that island. And I knew a man who met him as a child. His mother was very sick, and all he had to give him was like really a small denomination of a coin, a Greek coin. But that's all he had, because he couldn't afford the medicine that she needed to survive. So we went up to the mountain, and he offered him the coin, and he said, "Son, I don't have any use for something like that." And he kind of smiled, and the boy felt slighted, like, oh, he doesn't care. And he had an apple. He cut the apple in 4 pieces. The boy come up with a friend of his, like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years old, right? Come up with a friend of his, and there was the saint, and then the gardener who was with the saint. Only the 4 were there. So he cut the apple in 4 pieces, and he gave 1 piece each to the children. He gave 1 quarter to his gardener, and he ate 1 quarter. That was his lunch. That's how humble he was. Okay? And he said, "Son," he said, "your mother is fine. Don't worry. Don't worry. Go back to her and don't worry about it." Okay? And he went back, and she was like on her deathbed when he left, right? When he got back, she was cleaning out gutters, cutting weeds, and things like. She was like really active. And he said, "Mom, what's going on?" She said, "Well, I suddenly felt a lot better." You know, it's like she just like miraculously got better. And he realized, yeah, St. Sabas had prayed for him. And he said all these bad things to his friend as he was going down. So he felt really, really guilty. So he went back up the hill. You know, his head was like this. And he was going to apologize to the saint. And the saint laughed at him. He said, "Son, it's okay. It's all right, my son." So I patted him on the head. He says, "You go away." He says, "Okay." But there are stories of him getting in a boat and having a guy like row him around the island, and he was saying prayers for the sick. Okay, and there were a lot of sick on the island, like a plague or something like that. He went around, and the guy was rowing the boat. He went all the way around the island, and when he came back, no one was sick on the island. By God's grace, they were all cured. Okay, by his prayers. So very saintly person. A lot of stories from Kalinos about him. And so he would be like a more modern saint, okay, 1940s. And we have, yeah, this holy book is down below. And you'll see his hand like this, okay, and the blessing. And again, those letters represent I, let's see, I and C, okay, looks like I and C, and X and C. Okay, why I say that is, if you look at the icon of Christ, almost any icon of Christ, you'll recognize it by these letters. Looks like Well, it is actually inverted. It should be IC on this side and XC on that. Okay? First and last letters of Jesus in Greek, iota sigma, and the first and last letters of Christ in Greek, chi and sigma, Christos. Okay? They aren't really ideal Greek letters because when the church was introducing iconography, they were trying to introduce letters that would be familiar for everyone, and since it was Roman Empire, and there were a lot of Romans in the East having come to colonize, they wanted something that would at least look a little more familiar to them. So they stylized the sigma in what looked like a Latin C. Okay? Now on Christ's halo, you have this cross, omicron, omega, ni, all on. And that's a very slippery word. It means the one who is. The word of God in Hebrew is very mysterious. It's spelled Yod-He-Vav-He in Hebrew. And it means he who was, and he who is, and he who shall be, all at the same time. Okay, so that's why it's a weird word, it's slippery. And Olon kind of means that. That's the translation of that name from Hebrew into Greek. Okay? When we look at the Old Testament and when God speaks to Moses from the burning bush, he doesn't say, I am that I am. He says, I am one. I am, what do you mean, one? I am the one who is. Okay, the being one. I am the one who was, is, and shall be. Okay? And that's interesting because when Christians greeted each other, in the early days of the church especially, they would greet each other as St. Paul said 4 times, 4 different epistles, greet each other with the kiss of peace. And he would say, and when they did that, they would say, Christ is in our midst. And the answer is, was, and always shall be. Which is again that mysterious name of God that Christ himself revealed to Moses in the burning bush, almost 1,400, 1,600 years, whatever, before Christ came into the world. Okay? So that's what that means. You will see, unfortunately, these are not in English. I wish that some of them had been done in English at least, but we're working on it. But you will see John the Baptist on this side of Christ, on Christ's left. Okay? But there is a hierarchy. Here. The priest would be here. And then the next one would be on the other side of the first ranking priest, and etc. Okay, so they go out this way. So the first ranking, obviously, is Jesus Christ. He's God incarnate. The second, then, we would have the Virgin Mary, from whom he took flesh. The third, then, would be his cousin, St. John the Baptist. But he wasn't really one to keep things in the family, obviously, because he was spreading the Christian faith to non-Christians, like we had in today's gospel lesson. He sent that guy into a completely non-Jewish, non-Hebrew crowd to spread the word, okay, legion. And then we have on this side the namesake of the church. And like I said, it could be St. Nicholas, it could be St. Barbara, it could be any number of saints. It just so happens we're named after the Annunciation. And this particular icon is interesting because it's taken from a book that didn't make it to the Bible, but that was not objected to by the fathers of the church, the early fathers that actually put the Bible together and canonized it. This is about the Proto-Evangelium. It's called the Proto-Evangelium of James. Allegedly, St. James the Apostle wrote it, and he was the stepbrother of Christ. And he wrote about the Virgin Mary being chosen by the high priest to create a new drapery for the temple, like you see here, like this drape. Okay? The Holy of Holies needed a new drape. So she was the one that was chosen of the virgins from the temple to do that. And she's holding in her hands this little thing that she was making that out of. Okay? When the angel Gabriel appeared to her. Now that's not, obviously, those little details are not in the Bible, but they are in that book, or actually. So here, He's making the good word, good announcement. Ev is good. Angelos is message. So evangelos, okay, annunciation in Greek, evangelos means the good message, right? He's giving her the good message, like I spoke to you about. It's the same icon back there, but a little more details. You see these structures in the back, and some of those also come from that non-biblical book on the history of the Virgin Mary, okay? And then, again, on this side, generally in many of the churches, we have two doors to the altar area. The door of exit is usually Michael, and the door of entrance is Gabriel, but we only have one door, okay? So we have both archangels Michael and Gabriel on the same door, okay? But instead of Gabriel on this side then, we have St. Nicholas. Now why St. Nicholas? St. Nicholas is very popular. He was from Smyrna, a place in Asia Minor, in the western half of Turkey, what's now Turkey. Okay? A very early saint. Of course, he was very popular in Asia Minor from the beginning among the Greek Christians that were there. But his popularity grew, and obviously, he's known in the West. He became the kind of the prototype for Santa Claus. Okay, but he's still St. Nicholas in the West. His popularity grew in the East. Russia embraced St. Nicholas. They loved St. Nicholas. He became patron of children. He became patron of marriages. He became patron of islands. He became patron of those who sail at sea, because allegedly, many times when the sailors felt like their lives were going to be lost, St. Nicholas appeared to them walking on the waves and revealed himself and delivered them. And so many times sailors would pray to St. Nicholas and they'd say, if we are saved from this terrible storm and our ship is torn apart and we all drown, if we're saved from that, we survive, we're going to build a church to St. Nicholas. Okay. So these sailors, many of the times, they survived. They survived terrible conditions. And so when you go around Greece, you'll see all these coastal ports. St. Nicholas Church, St. Nicholas Church, St. Nicholas Church, St. Nicholas Church, Island, St. Nicholas, another island, St. Nicholas, another island, St. Nicholas, because they were built by those sailors who were so devoted to the saint because he had saved their lives time and time again. So they built these all over the place. And they gathered money, all the crew would gather money, and they would build a church for St. Nicholas. So that's why he became very popular and very widespread. Okay? And then we have on either side here, we have the hospitality of Abraham and St. Paul. Hospitality of Abraham is sometimes construed as the Holy Trinity. This says the idea Theos, okay, the Holy Trinity. Technically, it should be called the hospitality of Abraham. You know, the Old Testament, where these three dudes showed up, they actually called three men, and they're mysterious figures, and Abraham addresses them collectively as Lord, singular. Okay, which is why we feel that is a foreshadowing of the revelation of the Holy Trinity in the New Testament, because he's addressing these three mysterious people as one person. And of course, we know that he did hospitality, he killed a fatted calf, and he cooked for them, and his wife prepared for them, and they promised that God would give them a son. And Sarah overheard that inside the tent, and she laughed. And so the angel said to Abraham, "Why is your wife laughing?" And she came out of the tent and protested, "Oh, I didn't laugh." And they said, "You did laugh. You can't hide anything from God, right?" So they knew what was going on. They were also the ones that went into Sodom and kind of visited Lot, spared him by telling him what to do to survive, but eventually they destroyed the city. Okay? So they were also responsible for that. And of course they visited Abraham again. So when the child was born, it was named Isaac. Because Isaac means laughter. Okay? And there are a couple of other reasons why, but I won't get into them until another class. Then we have St. George. George is again popular name here. We have the icon of.
Sorry,
This is just no. You see St. George usually on a white horse.
Okay.
Today we celebrate St. Demetrius, and he's usually a red horse. Okay? And St. Demetrius, Father told the story earlier for the children about his martyrdom and how his spiritual son Nestor defeated Leos, this giant who's depicted here. It was through the intercessions of St. Demetrius, so that's why St. Demetrius is actually shown slaying him. But they never really battled, they never really fought physically, but it was through St. Demetrius' prayers that Nestor, who was more like a child, a spindly little child, was able to defeat such a huge opponent. Okay? So St. Demetrius, that's what we celebrate today. This extreme humility of Christ. On this icon, the Virgin Mary, there we put that out. Usually that's the icon we do for the Wednesday evening service at 6. The throne. Many of the accoutrements that you will see in the Orthodox Church come from the book of Revelation or the Apocalypse. Although we don't read that book during the course of the year, okay, this is like the throne of judgment. Okay, and you see Christ as both king and God. Melchizedek figure, for example, who was the priest and the king from the Old Testament, because he has vestments on of a priest, like a bishop, and yet he's wearing a crown of an emperor. Okay? And then you have here the resurrection. We call this the Lateran. We use that on processions for Holy Easter. And I guess we'll talk a little bit. There's one of the major feasts of Christ on January 6th, which is really big for us here. Usually the Sunday after January 6th. We go to the ocean and we throw in a cross, and our youngsters die for it. And the winner actually gets to carry the cross. And when I go, or with Father Alexander and I go on house blessings, we bring the child with us, and sometimes he gets tips, which is nice for carrying the cross, which he can use, I guess, for candy, but he can also save it for college as well.
Where's that cross normally kept?
Pardon?
Where's that cross normally kept?
I keep it in my emergency kit bag, but sometimes it's on the altar, sometimes it's in there. But I try to keep it in the bag so that I don't lose it or misplace it, and I know where it is at all times. And also when I go out to baptize, if I don't have another problem, that's the one that I want to use as well.
And where's this icon kept? Like when you bring
Well, we had put it on the window. Actually, this is my personal icon. It wasn't given to the church; it's given to me personally. But we don't have another one, so we've used this for the church. Okay. So maybe my house sometimes. And the icon of the baptism, of course, we have some strange symbols there as well. One is called Balasop, one is called the Old Man Jordan. You can see more clearly in the smaller icon, but this guy riding on a fish, there's a guy riding on a fish there, and then there's another guy that kind of looks serpentine, almost like a lizard man, okay? And so one of them depicts the ocean, the waters in general, and the other depicts the River Jordan, okay? You'll see the axe laid to the root of the tree. This is usually what we see in icons of St. John the Baptist, like if there's a scenery behind him, because he was the one that mentions the axe is laid to the root. Okay, meaning that the time of the fulfillment of Moses' law has come. Jesus Christ is going to transform the entire religious reality of what the Jews knew to something greater and more wonderful. Okay, so that was kind of a prophetic thing that St. John had said, and so often he's depicted with the axe laid to the root of the tree because of that prophecy that he said. And of course here Christ is being baptized, at least in a superficial sense, we see that. But the reality is, from the writings of the fathers, that it wasn't it wasn't Christ that was being cleansed, but actually the waters were being cleansed by Christ going into them. Okay? And this is a concept that we have very often in Orthodoxy, that Christ consecrates and changes the nature of something that he becomes. So he became a human being. Okay, we cannot look at each other as specks of dirt or clods of dust, okay, like we're worthless, because Christ became one of us. He assumed our human flesh. So every human being that we encounter, we have respect to them as if they are Jesus to us. Okay? Because he consecrated the sanctity of being a human being. God became a human being. Okay? And by extension, a saint can consecrate a profession or a position in society. Okay? If we have an emperor who's a saint, yeah, we might have a lot of emperors who are losers. But if one is a saint, then that institution has become sanctified. Okay? We have a lot of lawyers, okay? And some of them are honest and some of them are dishonest. But if we have one lawyer that becomes a saint, all the lawyers have been consecrated. Okay? That position has been somehow elevated in a spiritual way. And we have, of course, saints in all professions. Okay? Shoemakers, servants, different taxi drivers, any number of anything that you can think of, doctors, lawyers, anything professional, any manual labor, any kind of job that you can think of. We have so many saints that they've fulfilled those positions. Saint Demetrius, for example, was a warrior, okay, a soldier. And so often in Greece, for example, a particular regiment or perhaps even a branch of the military could be dedicated to Saint Demetrius. Okay? And that's not to say that the pagans didn't do the same thing, like they dedicate things to gods, stuff like that. The legions, like the legions of the Roman Empire had different things, different totems and stuff like that. But that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at Christ becoming a human being as the prototype of sanctifying everything in creation.
So,
Okay.
Jesus getting baptized, right? So what did John tell Jesus Christ when he was being baptized? Because, like, when we get baptized now, like, we say, and
Yeah.
so is that,
Well, he didn't have to say anything. I don't know what he said in the ritual of the baptism, okay? But he was terrified to say anything about cleansing of sins because he knew this guy was the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So how can he say that? He may have just kept his mouth shut and just let Jesus go in the water. But everything else happened, okay? Because you have the Son, you have the Holy Spirit descending from the Father, and then all of a sudden there was this thunderclap, and it sounded like a voice saying, "This is my Son in whom I am well pleased." So the Holy Trinity actually was revealed in the baptism and was witnessed by St. John and anyone else who would have been in like a stone's throw from it. Okay? And then we have the nativity on this side, nativity of Christ, light shining down from heaven, indicating this is the Son of God. The Virgin Mary, of course, reclining and bowing her head. Even though this is her son, she's still bowing her head in reverence to him and offering him service with her hands. We have the cave and the baby Jesus wrapped in swaddling clothes. But at the same time, it looks like he's wrapped in burial garment. He's a mummy, right? Okay? And the little, the feeding trough in which he was placed, okay, that's what a manger is, a feeding trough, okay? That also looks like a coffin, okay? So he's a baby wrapped in swaddling cloths in a manger, and he is going to be wrapped in burial garments in a coffin and laid in a cave, okay, when he dies. So we see both events at the same time, his birth and his death. Okay, his coming into the world and his burial, okay, from which he's going to rise from the dead. We see these animals. and I can't remember the symbolism of the bull, but the horse, okay, a word for horse is alogos. It means without logic, okay? And with that, and Christ is called also logos, word, okay? Logos is sometimes also without word. So Christ is coming into the world that does not have him. You understand? So the alogos, the horse, represents that he's coming into the world that lacks the word of God, and he is the word of God. Okay? And these animals, there's kind of a legend about the animals too. It was cold, it was cooler. So the animals actually drew near him. And they were breathing on, okay, human beings, we're not born Christian. We have to learn. Okay, so we have to acquire that. So we're all like these animals, essentially, but we have to acquire. We have to acquire knowledge of Christ. We have to acquire his word. We have to acquire his presence. We have to acquire the relationship with him that we otherwise would not have. Then we see the Magi again, as I was speaking about earlier. We see the shepherds up here. We see the angels that are singing of his birth. We see the washing of Jesus after his birth. There's a story that the older one didn't believe that the Virgin Mary was a virgin. So she was going to go and look. And the younger one said, no, don't do it. Because you don't need to. Prophecies say she's a virgin. Don't do it. But she said, no, I got to see for myself. And when she touched the Virgin's knee, as if to probe, her arm immediately withered up. And she came running out, and the other girl was like, I told you so. And she said, here, come here. The little girl said, come here. Put your arm in the water in which she cleansed and wash your arm in the same water. And so she did, and her arm was restored. Now, that's kind of like a parable, a story. That's a legend, but it's also a parable. If we try to probe things that are not to be understood, there are a lot of things in our faith that are mysterious. We can't really describe that. How can Jesus be the Son of God and yet one with him? How can there be three and yet one? How can we be monotheists but we have a three-part God? Okay, it's not something that we can really grasp. We can't wrap our heads around it. It's not something that we can understand. Okay, so that's something that if we try to over-explain and over-rationalize it, we're going to fall into false belief. We're going to fall into false conclusions. And our souls will wither, as if in heresy. Okay? So that's kind of what that teaches. There are some things that we just can't probe. We just don't know. God reveals to us. He reveals things to us, but we don't. It's impossible for us to fully understand it. Okay? That's how far beyond God is us. And that's one of the reasons why when we speak of the mystery of the Holy Trinity, we also say, and even the Jews concede, you can't understand God. And if you can understand what one is, God is not one, because God is beyond our comprehension. God cannot be one. You understand? He can't be three either, because we can understand what three is. And yet he says both at the same time. Okay? Which is not our existence. We can't understand it. We can't fathom that because we can't participate in something like that. Okay? So there are things that are above our heads, above our ability to understand and grasp. Okay? So that's what this little story represents. And Joseph, poor Joseph down here, kind of pondering, how can a virgin conceive a child? He's still grappling with that problem. And sometimes there's even a man here standing dressed in black, kind of furry cap, resting on a cane, which is a personification of like the devil or personification of doubt, pouring poison into his ear, saying, "Hey, Joseph, don't kid yourself. She must have cheated on you." Some things like that. Words running through his head like that. So
how is the halo like?
He overcomes it. He overcomes the doubt. He believes in the end. Okay, but that's just how they depict the doubt that he has, and sometimes, in so doing, kind of depicts our doubt. How sometimes we question it. Okay?
Oh, they're coming. Too much information for me.
Yeah. Overwhelming, yes. Okay, now all this happened at different times. The confusion in our modern day thinking was that the wise men and the shepherds, all this happened at one time. Okay, but apparently the wise men came later because Christ had time to be obviously circumcised on the 8th day, and he went to the temple with his mother on the 40th day. So all of that happened as well. But right after the wise men came, they had to flee to Egypt. So all that must have happened beforehand. So the wise men probably came somewhat later, a few months maybe later, after the birth itself. Again, because of art, that has a big influence on our understanding like of the nativity story. So when we make movies of it or we have songs, and stuff, it sounds like it all happened together. But technically, no. All right?
Is Joseph taught about in the Bible? Right?
Yeah. In fact, Matthew, it's Joseph who's the head character. And then in Luke, it's the Virgin Mary that's head character. Because the Annunciation, Angel Gabriel, he goes and he talks to the Virgin Mary. But in Matthew, the angel goes and he talks to Joseph. And he says, don't have doubt. This is true. This is of God. She conceived the Holy Spirit. Like, don't have doubt. This is the Son of God. Okay? And then tells him, go. Take the child and his mother and run to Egypt. Run away. The angel tells Joseph that, not Mary. But it's interesting that it happens that way because it may be that somehow someone who knew Joseph told that to Matthew, because he was dead by the time Matthew wrote, right? But someone who knew Joseph may have told him that from Joseph's perspective. And then Luke may have been told the story from the Virgin Mary herself. The whole Gospel of Luke may have rested heavily on the Virgin Mary's relationship with Christ, even through his ministry. Because Luke wasn't even around. Luke's one out of 12. He's one of the 7 and came later. So a lot of what Luke wrote may actually be from the Virgin. She lived well after, Christ's resurrection. So she would have been obviously a person to go to when if you had questions about Christ. Okay? So that's the iconography and the structure of the church, as I said. Again, and all that structure of the church is that Old Testament, it looks like the Old Testament temple from Jerusalem, but it also has a synagogue kind of feel to it too. Because in the synagogue, you can go ahead and say it. Because in the synagogue was a place where you went to learn about faith. Okay? But the temple was where you went to really make your offerings and have the sacrifice. Okay? And that's a place of praise. So what we do is we've combined both of those in the church, and that's reflected in the service and in the architecture. The service itself, you come to the door first in the morning, there are hymns, there's one reading from the gospel, you continue into the divine liturgy, there are the antiphons, there's the reading from the epistle, reading from the gospel, and then technically, and we change the order for kind of technical purposes, but generally in the old tradition, right after the epistle and gospel reading, the sermon would come. Okay? And that would end the synagogue. Okay, the synagogue, that was the climax of the synagogue, it's the sermon. Okay, and that would be the end of the synagogue service. Okay, but we continue to go to prepare Holy Communion, which is, and in Holy Communion, we're also going through steps of Christ's life. Okay, his crucifixion, his burial, and his resurrection. And when we receive Holy Communion, it's that part of the divine liturgy where we're actually reenacting or reliving the resurrection of Christ. So that's why we don't kneel when we receive Holy Communion. Communion. We're standing up. It's resurrectional. Okay? And then at the end, I don't know if you notice, like at the very end of the Divine Liturgy, I start saying, about Christ, and Virgin Mary, and the Holy Cross, and the angels, and John the Baptist, and the saints of the day, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, all these things are coming together. All the saints from out all time. I'm mentioning, I'm almost raffling them off. What do you call them? Auctioneer. Okay? And I'm just saying a list of the saints today and blah, blah, blah. Okay? That is the general resurrection. Okay? If you're looking at the progression of the service itself, we're going through the entire history of salvation, and we're coming to the general resurrection at the end, and entering into the kingdom of glory. Okay? And so that is reflected in the architecture, and it's reflected in the service, if you follow what I mean. And it goes back to combining the didactic part of the service, which was the synagogue, and the offering. Obviously, Holy Communion is the offering, the sacrifice, and we receive it at the end. That is the temple worship. All right? Follow what I mean? Any questions then on what I've said so far? Is there anything on the phone? Also on the phone? Yeah.
No, none like on the phone.
Okay.
But who are those three?
These three are Saint Gregory, the theologian, Saint John Chrysostom, and Saint Basil the Great. Okay, and the two main liturgies that we have throughout the year are Saint John Chrysostom and Saint Basil the Great. But we do have on like Wednesdays of Great Lent, of the fast before Easter, we do have a liturgy of Saint Gregory the Dialogist. Not this Saint Gregory, but one of the popes of Rome. For some reason, the Roman Catholic Church doesn't do that liturgy anymore, but we still do. Usually on Wednesdays of the Great Fast, the 40-day fast, and we also call it the pre-sanctified liturgy, because the gifts, the body and blood of Christ, are sanctified on Sunday, and then they're kept, they're kind of preserved until we bring them out Wednesday evening for everyone to receive communion. Okay, but this is Gregory the theologian. Only 3 people in Orthodox hagiography, among the Orthodox saints, have the title theologian. Okay, among the saints, I should say, and that is Saint John, the writer of the Gospel, the Apocalypse, and 3 letters from the New Testament. Okay, Saint John is called a theologian. Saint Simeon, who was a new theologian about 1,000 years ago. Okay, and Saint Gregory, the theologian. Saint Gregory was kind of a contemporary, kind of a 4th century contemporary of Saint Basil and Saint John. Well, as far as contemporary as, let's say, they were in the same century. Okay. These are also the saints that are patrons of education. And there was a debate in the Byzantine Church at one point, who was the greatest of these 3? And the debate raged so much that it was dividing people. People were fighting in the streets over who was the greatest of these saints. Some said it was Basil, some said it was St. John Chrysostom, some said it was Gregory, okay? And there was a particular monk who had a vision that these saints appeared to him, and because they were writing in different periods, they said we were writing in different periods to different issues, but we should all be seen as equal saints. No one should be above the other among us 3. And they said this simultaneously to this one man. And so they wanted him to write a service that would honor all 3 of them together as one, to bring the church back into unity, bring the people back into unity. And they chose to do it on the 30th of January, which is late in the month. But it so happens that in January, we celebrate other days, separate days, each one of those 3 saints. Okay, it all happened in January by divine providence. So even though we have the separate feasts of those saints in the same month, we have the 4th feast of them in January at the end together. Okay, so that's kind of the significance of the icon of those three appearing as one. Okay. On this side we have Constantine and Helen. Obviously, Constantine was the one that kind of definitively legalized Christianity. There were some that hemmed and hawed and edged around it. Tiberius Caesar, one of the early ones at the time of Christ, actually, allegedly was like a secret Christian who wanted to enter Christ into the pantheon of the gods of Rome. But the Senate, who were kind of like kowtowing to him, said, well, we'll do that if we can enter your name too. Okay, like he was humble enough to say, no, you don't call me a god. So they refused to put Christ in, but they say he was secretly a Christian. His daughter was healed by an image of Christ that Veronica held. I don't know if you know the story when Christ was going to his crucifixion. Veronica, this woman, took a veil off of her head, pressed it against his face because he was sweating profusely and bleeding. So she wanted to comfort him. So she pressed the kalumi, the covering of her head, against his face, and an image of his face appeared on the veil. So they took that as a gift. She and Mary Magdalene took that as a gift to the Emperor Tiberius. Mary Magdalene took an egg. And that's where we have the Easter reading in our church, Christ is risen. And the answer truly is risen. They approached the emperor and they said, Christ is risen. Now, why would she bring an egg? Well, gold is fitting for a king, right? But the poor people can't afford rich things. So it was recognized in Roman society that if you wanted to visit the emperor and have a personal talk with him, if you couldn't afford anything, at least bring an egg because it has a golden middle. Okay, so that's how they reasoned that was a fitting gift for a poor person to give the king. So Mary Magdalene brought the egg, and Veronica brought the veil. Tiberius apparently had a daughter that was in really bad straits. She was dying, and actually he was going to bring Christ to heal her by force if he had to. Okay, bring him to Rome. But Pontius Pilate allowed people to kill him, so he was really ticked at Pontius Pilate for allowing Jesus to be killed. Because now this man who could have healed his daughter is gone. So that's why he was like really raging against Pontius Pilate. But be that as it may, when Veronica gave him the image, they told him, show this to your daughter. And immediately when his daughter saw it, she was completely healed. So that's the story behind how he kind of secretly, or we say Christian Christian, so he became a secret Christian, secretly baptized. There's also, I think, Philip the Arab, who was actually openly Christian at one of the points, but he was a very hot-headed man, and he really didn't legalize Christianity, but they say he was a Christian. But he was one of the earlier Roman emperors as well. Alexander Severus vacillated because his mother was a Christian, but he vacillated between Christianity and paganism. So he had like a statue of Jesus on one side and a statue of one of the gods on the other. And he would go and he'd look at the statue of the god, and then he would think, and he'd go over and he'd look at the statue of Christ and think, and he'd go back and he'd look at the statue, but he'd go like back and forth. He couldn't make up his mind, he couldn't decide. Trajan, who was definitely not a Christian, wanted to end persecutions against Christians. He said, leave them alone. If they break the law, civil law, yeah, punish them like anyone else. But leave them alone. If they want to have their faith, let them have their faith. Okay, so Trajan was a pretty even-headed guy when it came to Christianity, that were opposed and that had to fight their families, also fought the Christians who were allegedly their allies. Okay, so that's a lot of the reasons why there's Christian persecution. There's a lot of things that are underlying that we don't have a full history of. But eventually, with Constantine, Christianity was legalized. Maybe before him, Valentinian, but not Diocletian, not Decius. No, but there were some parts there when one of the emperors got sick, and he asked the Christians to pray for him. Okay, so, but Constantine kind of, he turned the corner. Okay, he made it okay to be a Christian. There were, however, problems after him because his sons were Arians. They didn't embrace Orthodox Christianity. They embraced a different type of Christianity. And so the church again was persecuted. Those who believed in the divinity of Christ were persecuted by Constantine's children. And then when his granddaughter married his cousin, who was Julian, Julian, who's called the apostate, tried to return the empire back to paganism. Okay, so it isn't as clear as you think. People think, oh, Constantine the Great legalized Christianity, everything was rosy and good for the church afterwards. His sons were upset the church. His granddaughter's husband tried to take the empire back to paganism. Several other dynasties were opposed to icons in the church and embraced various other heresies, which brought us, our circle, the Orthodox Christians, back into persecution. Okay, so it isn't as clear as that, but he did indeed turn a corner. Okay, and they did great things for the church, but it was a struggle even afterwards. Okay, it was a struggle for Christians. And we had that struggle right up until modern times, and even to this day, Islam, okay, the majority church in Islamic countries, it's us. And we're persecuted. And sometimes we're killed because we refuse to embrace Islam. Okay? Communism. Okay? Russia was communist. This is an Orthodox empire that was then brought under communism, persecuted. Okay, so we are not unfamiliar with persecution. But persecution has a way of preserving the faith. Okay? We weren't allowed to evolve. We weren't allowed to have crazy ideas and go left and right because people who are under persecution hold on to what they have. Okay? And as long as there are a sufficient number of Orthodox Christians being persecuted in the world somewhere, Orthodoxy will be contained. It's not going to go crazy. Okay? It's going to hold to the traditions that the apostles of Christ gave us. Okay? We're not going to go flying off the handle. And maybe that's an unfortunate thing for the Western Church. They were free, so they zoomed. They went crazy directions. Okay? And there are various reasons for those as well. A departure from the original language. When you depart from Hebrew, okay, that's a problem. Unless you take from the Hebrew culture the way of thinking, the mentality. Okay? And that's what Orthodox Christianity did. Okay? The Greeks, essentially, morally, and what we call phronema, their psychology, became Jewish. It's no longer what it was before Christ. Okay? It became Jewish. So morally, the way we practice, how we interact with each other, is very Jewish, Christians. Okay? So the Greeks, everything that was Greek before was whitewashed. And everything that is Greek now was absolutely Christian, based on Jewish roots. Okay, so that's why when we say Greek or Greek Orthodox, people get the wrong impression. They think of a country, or they think of an ethnicity or a group of people that are called the Greeks. It's not that. Because the Greeks had a culture that they completely wiped clean and created a purely Christian culture. So to be a Greek was to be a Christian, was to be a Greek. There was no distinction. You understand what I mean? And that faith, and there were Greeks all over the world, so when that faith grew, Arab-speaking Greeks, and Greeks that were in Africa, Greeks that were further in Western Europe, they adopted that same Jewish culture, that same Christian culture. But on the fringes, where you didn't have that continuous relationship, and you didn't have many Jews anyway, so you didn't know their mentality, you had different ways of thinking. And when the church went there, they didn't have the foundation there to really hold on to the original ways. Okay, so there was things that slipped. There were things that got like syncretic. Some pagan things creeped in because the people couldn't quite make the absolute step into Christian, like totally Christian, if you follow what I mean. And that not only was a problem because then they were going on Latin translations of Greek translations of Hebrew translations. And when you translate from one language to another, you often lose quite a bit. Okay? So some of it is language. And I say often to the people who are coming to church, when you see an Orthodox Christian make the sign of the cross or bow down in front of an icon and kiss the icon, you think that you shouldn't do that to anyone but God. Okay? Because that's worship. Right? Well, we have different words. We have different words for our relationship with God and what we're doing. We have a different word for showing respect to the priest by kissing his hand and our relationship with God. It's not a God, it's not a worshiper and God relationship. You know what I'm saying? But we don't have those words in English. So what do we use? We use other words. Words that mean bowing down and showing outer signs of respect and all these things. And we don't have the word latria. So we use words that aren't the original word. And we get confused and we think, oh, we can't bow down, we can't kneel, we can't bow down, we can't kiss the hand of the priest or any bishop, because that would be idolatry. There's no word, latria doesn't even occur. We say the word proskinesis. Proskinesis, latria. They sound very different because they are very different. Latria is our relationship with God. Okay? And if we believe that a stone is our God, and we have a relationship with a stone as if it is our God, that is idolatry. But if we look at the stone as just a stone, it's not a God. It's like, that's it. Or if we look at the statue, and we don't call it our God, it's just a statue. It's not an idol. Okay, so this.
So, sorry that you all what do we say to someone when they say we worship idols? Like, what do we say to them? Like, do they say idolatry?
Do these people have photographs? Do they have phones, images on them? Photographs of the people? And you say you better throw this away because those are idols. Because your relationship with an image, like a photograph of your grandmother, you go close to your heart. God, don't do that, it's idolatry. You know? But then they might argue, well, my grandmother isn't my God. Well, you know what? The icon isn't our God either. So how do you call it idolatry? Okay, idol isn't like latria. The word, you have to understand the origin of the word. Okay? Idol, latria, worship. Okay, latria is my relationship with my God. There's no latria between me and this icon. I might respect it because it's an image of the saint. Okay? And I might ask the saint in prayer to the saint to pray for me. But Saint Demetrius is not my God. Okay? And I might respect the Virgin Mary highly, very highly. But she's not God. She's not one of the Trinity. Okay? So, I'm confused. If you're saying I'm an idolatrous and I worship icons, well, what do you mean by worship? That I kiss them? That I show respect to them? That's not latria. But latria doesn't exist in English, so we say worship, bow down, venerate, kiss, whatever. All those words we use for latria, but it's not latria. And that's the problem with language. And that's where we get in our problems. We get mixed up and we get false things. Okay? When Christ took bread, okay, Roman Catholics have flat bread, unleavened bread, right? Okay. When you read in the original Greek text, Christ took bread and he broke it and he gave it to his disciples. Okay, the word is arko. There's no mistaking in Greek. That's a risen loaf of bread. It's not the unleavened bread of the Passover. And that's why it might have been scandalous to Jews. And they're looking at Jesus like, why are you breaking risen bread at a Passover meal? It's because he's the resurrection. He's transforming it into something else. That's why. Okay, so the word arto in Greek is a loaf of bread. If it had been flat bread that Jesus had broken and given to his disciples, like Passover bread, they would have called it azimi, which means without yeast. And that's the word for flat bread in Greek, azimi. But the Greek does not say Christ took azimi and broke it. It says he took arto, a loaf of risen bread, and he broke it. And he said, this is my body, eat. So, but in the Latin, there's no distinction. So when it went to Latin, you're separated from the Greek original, and you think, oh, this is bread. Like, it must have been unleavened bread. Yeah, it must have been. Because it's a Passover meal. Mistake. And that's just one. And there are, anyway, epistatis is like sometimes a teacher. Or epistatis, you can write a book on that, just the one word alone, epistatis. Epistatis is like a philosopher, a doctor, a rabbi, a teacher, a priest, a loving mentor, a person who cares about people that are in his care. Okay? It's not your boss. Your boss could not care about you, potentially. Your boss doesn't carry the weight of epistatis. The epistatis is responsible for your physical and spiritual welfare. Okay, so when you see this word in English, it's empty of the original meaning. Anamnesis, when Christ gave his body and blood to his disciples to eat, he said, do this in anamnesis of me. He didn't just say in memory. He didn't just say, do this and remember me. Anamnesis is ana. It's going upward. It's a different relationship. It's like when you eat this bread, and drink this wine, you are consuming my body and drinking my blood in this very moment. No matter how far in the future it is, you're doing it with me now. It's a timeless thing, which is precisely why the icons of the Mystic Supper, the Last Supper, you might call it, we call it Mystic Supper, as you see it above, looks like a round table, and it's cut off, and half of it is empty. I mean, the same is true of, what is it, Da Vinci? Is it Michelangelo or Da Vinci? Who did the Last Supper?
Da Vinci.
Okay, Da Vinci. Same is true of Da Vinci's Last Supper. Okay, they're all sitting in the back of the table. And then the front table is empty. Why? Why is that empty? Same reason why it's empty in the icons. It's inviting us to complete the icon. We participate in that event as if it's now. That's what anamnesis means. This historical event, which you might call the Last Supper, we call it the Mystic Supper because it's continuous. It's beyond history. It's beyond time. Because Christ is God. He's not held by time. He's beyond time. Everything that Christ said and everything that he did is beyond time. So when he says, take, eat, and take drink to his disciples, it's written down in the gospel because it's timeless. And he's saying the same thing to us. When we receive Holy Communion, we are participating in that very event as if it's happening right now with Christ and the disciples in that room. Okay? And that's what anamnesis means. But you say, do this in memory of me, you lost a lot of meaning. See what I mean? So there are problems in language. There are problems in history. Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church were together for around 1,000 years. But there were many differences that we had before that. Okay, minor divisions and schisms, and the direction was not the same. The ecumenical councils were pretty much something that we followed, not legalistically, but I mean, this was our
Tradition.
it was our, can't think of the word, it was our,
Guiding. Like a guiding.
yeah, like guidelines, our guidelines. Not to adopt pagan feasts, not to adopt pagan symbols, like Halloween. Okay, we didn't preserve any of that from ancient Greece. We didn't preserve any of the feasts of the ancient Greeks, or any of their symbols, or any of their beliefs. Okay, we have our own. And they're almost purely Christian. Okay? Some of them may have been revealed, I don't know, but a lot of them are Jewish roots. Like I said, the Easter egg. You can say other cultures had the egg and they colored it, and there was a feast around this time. But you know, it's when Christ rose from the dead, around Passover. We know it happened at that time. And if Christ is perfect man, then wouldn't you think that his conception and his death would occur on the same calendar date? I mean, that would like celebrate him as perfect man. It was March 25th, it was Passover. Count 9 months later, what do you get? December 25th. So if he was conceived on the same day that he was crucified and died, 25th of March, and he's perfect man, then exactly 9 months later would have been his birth on the calendar. That's where it comes from. All right? So that's the thing behind it, but they don't want you to know that. They want you to think that it's connected to some paganism, or that the winter solstice, which it never was. Winter solstice was on another date. So anyway, there's a lot of lies, unfortunately, going around. And hopefully I can be here to clear some of those up. But that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of the history of the church. We meet with us, Coptic Church, Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Coptic Church, we even have a document that's just waiting to be signed by a few more Orthodox patriarchs. It's already been signed by the Copts for reunion. We're just waiting for signatures. Okay. There's some of the Armenians, some of the Armenian Orthodox Church are really gung-ho to do it, and some are not. So they're kind of fighting among themselves whether to do it or when to do it. The church in India is really divided, unfortunately. It's been taking a lot of abuse by the Anglican and Catholic churches, like stealing sheep. So that's a sad situation. But they too are very close to us. And if people from those churches happen to end up here, they don't have churches of their own, they come to us. And even their priests will tell them, you got a big Orthodox church? Go there. Okay? Because we're that close. We're that close to the Oriental Orthodox. They have some very old traditions. They have some little differences, but those differences are really minor. Now we've come to understand that even though we might be speaking different words, okay, we actually do believe the same thing, the same theology, which is very refreshing and progressive thing for reunion with them. Okay? So any questions?
My last one is, so as long as this church been here, have you guys faced any persecutions?
Well,
You mean Moms or Orthodox Church?
Yeah, like
right here. Right here on this island. Yeah, because when the Greeks, look,
from other churches and
well, from the English. I mean, look, when we Greeks, I'm a convert, but I have mixed ancestry. So I'm like, when I was growing up, my father and his side of the family really emphasized that we're Choctaw-Chickasaw. It's like, we're kind of weird. I look white, but like people call me white, I get upset. And I say, no, I'm American Indian. You know, like all my cousins are like, no, we're American Indians. But be that as it may, when the Greeks first came here, they were not white people. They could not go to white bathrooms. They could not go to the government house. Okay? They could not go to exclusively white restaurants. And they were called by the N-word. And some, to this day, some white Bohemians, some hoity-toity white, high-class, Bohemian, whatever, white, they still call us N's. I'm the N priest. His grandfather became a senator. Right? He went to the government house with your grandma, and they wouldn't let her in. They couldn't stop him. He's a senator, right? He's Greek, not white. He's not white. But his wife, they stopped. She's not white. She can't come. So yeah, we've faced a lot of prejudice. That happened in a lot of places in the United States too. Where I came from, Oregon, there are deeds to homes. They still have them. I mean, no one recognizes it's not legal anymore, but it's written there. It's like in the original deed. This property will not be sold to Jews, blacks, or Greeks. And that's the order. That was the order. I mean, Greeks were beneath blacks. They were lower. They were lower than blacks in the society. And in fact, some of the big cities, I don't know about his wife's family, she's from Chicago, but I know some of the other big cities, I've heard stories where they went to the whites rejected them. You're Greek, you can't, no place for you here. They went to the Jews, same thing. They went to the Italians, same thing. They went to the Irish, same thing. And then they went to the blacks and they said, yeah, come with us. You can live with us.
There's a very interesting photo that is in the archives of Time magazine of the march by Martin Luther King on Selma. And it shows the picture of Archbishop Jacobus alongside Martin Luther King as they marched in solidarity for civil rights. It's a very little known fact that our Archbishop marched step in step with Martin Luther King at the dawn of the civil rights movement.
So, we're not white people. And we were persecuted by it. And the Greeks that tried to get their own businesses here on the island, because they were not considered white, they couldn't have businesses unless they had a white partner. They go in with them. Okay, they tried, because they were sponge divers, but like, I don't know, for you, those of you, who was here last night? You were here last night?
No.
Okay, no, none of you were here last night? Okay. Last night we had, what's it called, Bookie Day. And the word came up, philotimia, or philotemo. And it comes from two words, philo, which is friend, and timia is honor. So friend of honor, okay? But it means a lot more than that. Philotimia is really the foundation of what it is to be a Greek. And that's why Greeks went from slavery because they were slaves in the Ottoman Empire. I mean, if you had a wife, and you're a Christian, you had a wife, the Turk could come along and take your wife away and put her into a brothel or give her or sell her in marriage to a Muslim. It didn't matter. They didn't recognize your marriage because you're a Christian. They could take your wife away. And they took children away. And they took little boys away and raped them. And you couldn't do anything about it because you're a Christian. And this kind of thing happened to the Greeks over there. Okay? Before they came here, they fought for their independence in 1821, but not all of them were independent, because still, a lot of them are living in Turkey, and some of them secretly in Turkey. But a lot of nasty things happen to you. You see the bad movies about black slavery. What happened? The same thing was going on, if not worse, to the Greeks behind the Islamic curtain. I mean, it was nasty what was done to them. Okay? But they had in the foundation this thing, philotimia. Okay? It was a personhood, it was a clinging together, and it was a sense of you can't fail. You can't fail because you shame the entire family. Do not fail because it's not just you. Like the entire group of people, everyone will be ashamed. And that was the pressure on you to succeed. So when they came here, and they were still diving for sponges, which they didn't understand the bends, sometimes they came up paralyzed, sometimes they came up dead, blinded, things like that. Because, if you come up too fast from the ocean, it can kill you. The nitrogen, like bubbles in your blood, and it messes you up, do physical damage. So they went from that, and they did not, people that came here diving for sponges, it's like, their children, you're not going to do this. You're not going to do this. Okay, you go to school, you get an education, you do something else. You're not going to do something this dangerous where you're only paid a few pennies. Okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make sacrifices so that you don't have to. Okay, so a lot of the Greeks went to America, they were washing dishes, doing humble things. They're billionaires now. But they started out low. Okay, and they sure as heck did not want their children to do that. They couldn't put up with it. It was a shame. Okay, I'll do it, and I'll make the sacrifice. But kid, you're going to be better than me. Okay, so that's how the Greeks are. That's why they succeeded. Okay, because they were really forceful about that. Okay, this man came from Kalymnos, Father Alexander. Okay, some of his ancestors were in politics. Some of his ancestors were also sponge divers. Okay, and it wasn't fun. They weren't living high on the hog like the Turks were.
My grandfather was a politician, but he was born here in 1916. It was his parents that came over at the turn of the century in the sponge trade.
Right, but a few generations back, they were actually governors and mayors of the Greek communities in Kalymnos.
Yeah.
So I'm saying they had their ups and downs throughout history.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's still, even the Greeks that had those advantages back there, they weren't really advantages in the end. Okay, because those are the guys that were really under the knife. I mean, if you were representing your people, you better have the money that the Turkish authorities want when they come, or they'll kill you. Okay, you better make sure that your people do what the Sultan wants, or you're dead. If they don't like you, they'll kill you and find someone else to put in your place. You know what I mean? So even that was not a comfy, job security kind of thing. So when you ask about persecution, yeah, the Greeks know what that is. Historically, they come from a lot of nastiness, a lot of persecution, terrible things, terrible stories. There were these women, they wanted to protect their women, so they put them up in this church, high on the hill, high on a cliff. And all the men were killed, and the Turks were coming up. And you know what's going to happen? Okay, they're going to rape the women. They're going to rape them, right? So these are Christian women, they don't want to be raped. What do? They start a dance. Sorry. You tell her what this is.
They basically danced, and as they came in a circle to the edge of the cliff, in turn they would jump, and they did so to the last person. So
Sometimes with their babies and children in their hands.
sometimes so as not to be taken and violated and or sold into slavery. That was the depth of their love of freedom and liberty and resistance to the Ottoman oppression.
So forgive me if I cry. So I hope I didn't whip the dead horse, but that's kind of the answer to your question. Yeah, we've faced persecution. And still do. Okay.
This isn't a pew, is this a book?
Yeah, that's a Bible. That's a Bible.
I mean, this one, yeah.
That's broken off of an Eastern Holy Week book.
So that's another? or-
Yeah, I guess we don't have to. The rest of the book isn't here with it. That's it.
What is the word you said in Mark for the kids, for anyone be quiet?
Isikia. There's also another word, phronima, which is mindset, that kind of thing. But also, that's also said, the children are bebopping around, and you want them to behave properly. You say, phronima. That's another modern Greek word. Okay. So any other questions then?
Yes. I have two final questions.
Yes.
So the first one is, what's going on with the faucet over there? And then the second one is, what's going on up there?
The faucet was originally functional, but we've done a lot of renovation, so I don't know if it really works anymore. It used to be clean water that we would use for baptism. So we just turn the water on and it would fill up the baptismal font, which is underneath that white stuff, the white coverings. Okay. What's going on where? You mean the dome?
Yeah, the dome.
Okay, we generally don't have steeples in the Orthodox Church. We have domes, and probably because of the climate. Usually most of the Orthodox churches, the Greek Orthodox churches, and the churches in the East, you don't have a lot of snow. So the dome, even though it's a good structure, is not really challenged in those climates. But when you go to Russia, for example, sometimes there's so much snow that it can really collapse those domes, okay? So they will have cupolas, kind of like the onion-shaped ones, in order to allow the snow to fall off more freely, okay? So that's how the dome was stylized in northern countries to avoid structural to keep structural integrity, not to have it collapse. The steeples are generally for that purpose. The steeper the steeple, more north you go in Europe. Generally, the steeper the steeple. Okay, so a house will have a frame like this on the roof, so the rain can fall off, right? But when you have heavy snow, it's going to collapse. So you make it steeper like this, so the snow will fall off more easily, and you're not going to carry so much weight. You know, same is true of the steeple. Okay, a lot of the churches had roofs like this, but then when they were building them further and further north, the snow caused problems, so they made the roof more narrow like this. So that's how the steeple came into being. But the philosophy and the beliefs behind those structures are different. For example, going maybe back to St. Augustine and his followers, the world was considered to be fallen and therefore corrupt, and therefore, in order to attain heaven, you had to cut away the earth, like the worldly things. Okay, so when you see worldly things being annihilated at the top of the steeple, that's where you have the cross and passage in heaven, because the world was considered corrupt and fallen and evil, and nothing was good about it. From our perspective, God created everything good. And despite the fact that, yes, man fell, and there is corruption, nevertheless, it's still good, because it's still God's creation. And so the dome represents God reaching down to embrace not only us, but all of creation, the entire world, the entire cosmos, and call it back to himself, to re-sanctify it to himself. Like I was talking about Christ sanctifying humanity in his incarnation, so too that's God's plan, to sanctify all of creation. And when we talk about the heavens being wrapped up and the world not being recognized anymore, it's the same world, it's the same cosmos, but it's so transformed and so changed by God's grace that it appears to be something new and different. But it's actually the transformation of the old. So that's how we view in the dome. We have the dome because it's God reaching down to embrace us as a dove of creation and take it to his bosom, as opposed to the steeple, which is all of this is evil. We have to get it cut away from it. Once we annihilate physical connection, then there's the process to heaven. So it's a different approach.
And then what about the symbolism around it?
Okay, we have the icons here. The icon of the Pantocrator, which means the one who's in control of everything and is ruling everything. Okay, that's Christ. And then we have the four angels representing the angels that serve the Lord, holding up, kind of like they're holding up the icon. And then we have in the four corners, four of the 8 sides here, we have these animal symbols of the 4 Gospels. Okay? Like the eagle represents John, for example. The bull, I think, represents, let's see, I know the lion represents Mark. Luke, and then the eagle represents John, sorry. I think Luke might be the angels. Okay, so, pardon?
Isn't he the ox?
The ox, yes. So that's what we're at Matthew. So the 4 Gospels. And then we have on the icons that are on the windows, we have St. Luke here. We have St. Helen. St. John there, and St. Sophos of Palinos there. Okay, and those are the 8 icons that we have in the glass windows. And then the chandelier, which is often called the podium because it was oil candles. And podi is much, and helios is oil. So the oil candles would be actually lowered down so that you could light the oil candles, and then it would be raised up again. Okay, and we still do. Those are not oil candles, obviously. In the old days they were, but we still use oil candles in the church, for example, up in front on these those golden things there, and the golden thing there and there. Okay, we still use oil in those candles, and in the back there's a little that glass thing in the candle stand. We have the 3 wicks. That's also oil, olive oil that we use. Okay.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
The family that was holding the candles for Holy Communion, they became Orthodox Christians.
Last week.
Oh, you're talking about the Mackenzies? Yeah.
was made.
Yeah, one of their sons is away at college, but yeah, the 2 of them and 2 of their children, the daughter and the son, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I was figuring out on like when do we get baptized?
Well, I know you guys have been here for a while already before, but you came like when I was finishing the catechism. So like once you go through the catechism, and you have a little more knowledge about what it's about. And then if you still want, if I haven't discouraged you, or if I have encouraged you from that time, hopefully I don't discourage you. But if you're encouraged by it, you like what you're learning, you see, then how long have you been with us? How many months?
2, maybe 2 or 1.5.
Okay. Okay, so let's say by the end of this it'll be 4 or 5. Maybe give it 8 or 9 months, if that's not too long. But I mean, but if you feel you're ready before that, then by all means, talk to me. Okay, and that goes for any of you. I mean, we want you to make sure that you experience the church first, because it's not like a revolving door. Like, we want you to stay. We want this to be your home. But if you don't find it that way, then God bless you. We're not, again, that's like our mentality is like, we're a church that's here because of Christ's love, not because Christ threatens us. Okay? So you should never hear us say, oh, if you're going to leave the church, you're going to hell. It's not what we say. We don't think that way. Okay? We never use that tactic. Okay? Because we were never involved in the Protestant Catholic wars, Reformation, Counter-Reformation, all that kind of stuff, where that kind of thinking came to being. Okay? We were behind persecution. We didn't really come here to share our faith. I mean, it's good that we do, but I mean, we didn't really come here to share because almost everyone else is Christian, right? So if we're going to go convert someone, we usually find someone who is not a Christian because we don't want to be rude. You know what I'm saying? You come into a Christian country and you say, we're the only Christians on the block. Excuse me? That's rude. And it's like, it's repulsive too. I wouldn't want to be in a church that says that. Because like, you're down. You're one of us, you're going to hell. It doesn't reflect the love of Christ. I'm sorry. It just doesn't. So, but anyway, be that as it may, we try to be welcoming. It is the Christian church. I mean, we're not a new church. We believe that we are the church established by Christ and the apostles. We're the church on which the Bible was based, rather than the other way around. Not a Bible-based church, but the Bible was based on us. I mean, that sounds like a boast, but that's just, for us, it's just a historical fact. We don't have a Reformation. We don't have a founder other than Christ and the apostles. So, but at the same time, we don't want to be disrespectful. Here, Kirk said to me, before we all came, before we started getting a lot of converts, he said, oh, have you come to check the competition? And I said, no, we're not really competitive. Okay. A few weeks later, I have 8 people coming into it. 8 people. After 10 years, like 1 or 2 people after in 10 years, 1 or 2, 3 converts, maybe in 10 years. And all of a sudden, you're like the 3rd group of people this size who's come to the church to become Orthodox. in rapid succession. So I believe it's the hand of God, and I'm not going to fight him. You know, if you all want to become Christian, God bless you. I mean, if you all become Orthodox Christian, you know, God bless you, and I encourage it. But
And then,
out of respect, you got to respect it.
so, and then another question. I have a prayer corner at home. Whenever it's possible, but can you come to my home and bless
Sure.
my prayer corner?
Sure. Would it be okay with the rest of your family to bless the house?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I hope so.
Okay. Well, the parts of the house that you share, I can leave rooms alone if one or two people don't want me to, or something like that. I just leave that room alone.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and let the demons stay there. I'm just joking.
All right. Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, because we do house blessings in January. Oh, okay. But if you want it sooner, or if you need it sooner, sometimes there are like demonic manifestations, I hate to say, in some people's homes, and they're scared, like bad dreams or things are moving around. It should be. And yeah, we recognize the reality of demons and the necessity to bless them. So if there's something like that happening, then by all means, you can call me and I'll do a blessing.
I would also keep in mind the last $1,000
Yes. Okay. When it comes, after we do the throwing of the cross, then we have actually sign up. We give people an opportunity for sign up. Okay? But other than that, then, because some people don't sign up because we go to them every year anyway, because we have them on the list. But if you want to be on the list, then at the time when there's a sign up, make sure you sign up for like the weekend that you want that's best for you, or the weekend and the time, and then we'll go from there. All right? And your address, of course. Okay?
Is it possible you can get your contact?
I think, yeah, it's on here, right here. Yeah, it's right. Yeah, it's on the bottom of the syllabus. All right, any other questions? Okay, so next week we'll be looking at the what the church is, the Nicene Creed, what Jesus is, how the Trinity, what the Trinity is, and the divine liberty. That's a lot. It's a lot to go over. So hopefully we can cover it in that time. And I gave the pages here, and I don't know if these are the same. I might have to review the pages and tell you that by contact. But I'd like you to look at the preface. I like you to look at the preface and the table of contents, or like the listing of the chapters, so that you know what's coming up, and it gives you an idea of where the book is headed. Okay? I'm kind of strange that way myself. When I get a book, I look at all the appendices first, and then I look at the index. So everything but chapter 1. I don't start chapter 1. I have to look before and after, and then I start. So it gives me a little better idea of where the book is going and what the guy is thinking, and then so that I can understand when I start officially. Okay?
And I have a question. So you were talking about this.
Yeah.
This sign. So I also talked to Deacon about this too. So only bishops and priests can bless people and do this.
Yeah, generally. Yeah. And it's not 666. Someone looked at it, it looks like this, and this. Okay, but the number, like that, using that for 6, like the Arab numeral as we call it, was not even introduced into Europe, like until what, the 1400s. And this symbol goes way back before that. So you cannot say that this is supposed to be 666, because the numbers, that symbol for the number 6 didn't exist until relatively recent times. And this is an ancient system. Okay?
I asked them because I was actually like doing it without.
Oh, no,
I've seen it.
yeah, generally the lay people, or people like deacons and will, the hierarchy, will make the sign of the cross like this, like I taught you.
So I can do this.
Yeah. Okay? Yes.
I noticed that the church in Nassau is correctly, like next to all these buildings and everything. In other places I've seen the churches either, whether it be monasteries on mountains or maybe in the center of a city, maybe raised on a hill. I want to know if the location has to do with theology as well. I know a lot of like Protestant churches are like strung about.
Right.
I see that Orthodox and sometimes Catholic ones are like on hills, either separated from or elevated in the middle.
Sometimes it depends on the church that you're building and the purpose. This church is here because the Greek community started here, and there wasn't much anything else around. But I noticed almost like, I don't know, it's a British way of thinking, where there's one church, they have to build another. Okay, and I noticed it when I went to missions in Uganda, that the Orthodox church, they built an Orthodox church for this village that had no church, like no Christianity there. So they built this church, Orthodox church, and the older guy that was there wanted to build also a school, right? So the Anglicans heard, oh, the Orthodox they're starting this church and school out in this, like, nowhere. And so they come into the area and they build this huge school and a massive church, all this. Yeah, they're doing it so that we don't get a foothold there. You know what I'm saying? It's competition. It's kind of nasty. So then the Anglicans heard the Catholics were doing that, and they did it to them. Tennis courts, swimming pools for children like this, and and their school and their church and compound and facility. And the old man was like, hey, I don't care. I just wanted school for these people. I mean, if they're going to build it, glory to God. He wasn't looking to compete. But unfortunately, sometimes you find the churches close together because they're competing. And I don't know if there was another church here when this one started, but I know that it was here because the Greek people were living here. This was their community. And all their land was around. This was a Greek home on this property. He gave his property to build the church, or sold it to the church, whatever it was. Okay? But in Orthodox countries, yeah, monasteries are supposed to be far from cities. But the problem is, you got some saintly people there, they're healing people, so all the farmers start going, they want to live near the monastery because that's their hospital, that's their, if they get sick, saint's going to heal them. So that's how, or some popular saint, or someone with good confession, or a person who loves and is ministering to the people from the monastery, all of a sudden you have a city growing up around the monastery.
Exactly. If it's in Providence, that's pretty much exactly what it was. No one was there for miles, and then it was a couple farmers, go some more monastery.
Yeah.
I see in
Is that it?
I think it's Ethiopian.
Yeah.
They actually dug out the ground to make a church.
The Liboa did.
Where is it?
The Liboa, another one did in Aksum.
Oh,
In Aksum, they were Zagwe dynasty.
nice.
He carved down, there are like 14 churches that are carved in rock. They went from the ground, they like carved down and cut down. Solid.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Okay, that's it. All right. Okay, so you have the syllabus, you have the books, hopefully. So that's it for the day.